A young adult novel about small-town politics was a Newbery nominee in the year 2000. Does it hold up 24 years later? I discussed this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. And I was holding up my Kindle because I read this on my Kindle and didn't have a physical book to show you. But today I am talking about a book that focuses on small town, waitressing, and politics. I am referring to Hope Was Here by Joan Bauer, which was written in the year 2000. For those who don't know, Joan Bauer is an American author who has written quite a bit of young adult literature. One of those books was this one, which was also a Newbery honoree, Newbery nominee, which usually indicates some pretty high quality books. As a reminder, I've talked about A Wish in the Dark and The Girl Who Drank the Moon and Holes, which were all high quality. And this was nominated in the same year that Because of Winn-Dixie was also nominated, which is a book that I had, fond memories of. And so that would also indicate that this might also be high quality, but unfortunately, this book suffers from a few problems here and there, which is very important to talk about, especially given the subject matter of this book. Don't know too much else about Joan. It seems that she's still writing in the present day, so she's had somewhat of a lengthy writing career. But without further ado, let's talk about Hope Was Here. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Hope Was Here focuses on a young teenager named Hope and her aunt Addie, they live in Brooklyn, New York. They serve as waitresses for and managers for a restaurant, a diner of sorts. But they find that the owner has absconded with the money, and so now they find themselves out of a job. And so they decide to move to Mulhoney, where another restaurant owner named G.T. Stoop has requested their help in helping to run it while he has leukemia. And Hope is resistant to move away, but she's willing to help her aunt out with that sort of thing. It should also be noted that Hope doesn't really have a lot of contact with her mother. She's really only met her 3 times in her life. And she doesn't know who her father is, so she feels distant and she kind of wants that parental experience, but she's very much happy living with her Aunt Addie, who has decided to raise her in her mother's stead. They manage to make it to Mulhoney, Wisconsin, where they set up shop at the Welcome Stairways Diner, and GT has leukemia, and during one of the welcome events in the town, the GT announces in front of the mayor that he's running for mayor in the next election. Everyone wonders why he's doing that, given that he has cancer, and he says that it's sort of a bucket list kind of thing, and he hopes to get rid of some of the corruption in town, especially noting that a local business called the Real Fresh Dairy doesn't seem to be paying its taxes, and the mayor isn't making them, so there seems to be a deal going on behind the scenes. And indeed, we see the Real Fresh Dairy with their control in the town, and also sort of disrupting the town with their business goings on. And GT just wants to put a stop to that. There's some obstacles in getting GT on the ballot, but he is able to get on the ballot, which is good for him. But unfortunately, this begins Mayor Millstone's shady tactics, which seem to include having burglars target the homes of people who side with GT, and also running ads that are misleading the people about GT or outright lying about him. And GT refuses to go on the offensive and be just as devious about Millstone because he feels that wouldn't be within his character, so he decides to just try to reach the people in the only way that he really knows how, and be honest with them. As Hope is helping to waitress in the restaurant, she receives a visit from her mom, like the fourth time she's ever seen her. Her mom seems a little bit distant, which makes Hope unhappy, and after her mom leaves, Hope relies on her coworkers and on Addie to find support in that moment right there. And then she also somewhat develops a relationship with one of the cooks, a man named Braverman, even though there's a weird age difference between the two of them. And Hope is able to connect and find a little bit of love in that sort of way. And it also seems like Addie, Aunt Addie, is in a relationship with GT, and they in fact get married later in the story. GT enters remission at that point, which is great. He tells everyone and they're happy for him. Although Millstone is still running ads suggesting that GT is lying about being in remission, which affects some of the votes in the election. And in fact, it seems like GT has lost the election. But as the weeks go by, Hope finds out that some of the people who were claimed to have voted in the election didn't actually vote, and that there has been some massive election fraud here, or just minor election fraud. And it turns out when they recount the votes, GT actually wins, and GT is as mayor, and he brings some reform to the town, which makes a lot of people happy. He also formally adopts Hope, and she feels like she's got that support that she's never had before. And then, unfortunately, a couple of years later, GT dies, which makes Hope sad. But she's able to connect with GT one last time, and in saying that she actually feels like he's a real father to her, which is what she's always wanted. And as the story comes to a close, Hope reflects on what GT meant to her, and she goes to college, indicating that she's possibly leaving this life of waitressing. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a little bit worth talking about with Hope Was Here. A major theme which you'll find me talking about is that Bauer is touching upon some interesting topics, but dropping the ball and just like speeding through the story really quickly rather than focusing on any of these topics, which could bring substance and weight to the story. Like one of the ideas that she's talking about is hope. It's not simply the name of the main character. It's what it's sort of like a main centerpiece of the story. Bauer is writing about the belief that things will get better. Specifically, the townspeople, but also Hope herself wanting to hope that that things will get better for her friends and her family, and that things will turn out well. And you see that again with Hope's name, but you also see it when she thinks about her like family reunion, hoping that her father will show up randomly one day, even though he might not even know that there is a daughter present here, because Hope's mother never really talked about a father. And hoping that her mother comes back into her life permanently, but yeah, that doesn't seem like it's going to be happening either. And she also hopes success for her friends, including GT and Addie and Braverman, just wanting them to be lifted out of any sort of sadness that they experience in life. But again, like this is a very interesting theme that could be sort of further explored, but Bauer only seems to touch the surface here. And in fact, there are no real dark moments for which there would need to be hope. Like, Braverman is beat up in this story, but he seems to quickly heal, and the people are caught relatively quickly, like a chapter or two later. And so there's no real need for hope, because there's nothing to hope for. If Bauer dug deeper and found like a real conflict in this story, like a large part of the problem is that it seems that Bauer doesn't really have a plot or a main centerpiece besides the election for which there would need to be hope. And so that I feel like that sort of rushing through and not giving characters a reason to hope kind of makes the story and that overall message suffer a little bit. Bauer also seems to be talking about politics, which is interesting because this was written in the year 2000, a time when there was an election, but also big politics happening. What with the election results in Florida and all of that. But I think this was written before those election results and whatnot. But Bauer touches upon small town politics, which I came from a small town, so I could easily see this happening where I grew up. And it's something that, it's important to talk about, not only with the, Washington, D.C. type politics, but what's going on in your town matters every bit as what's going on in the larger scheme of things, like with governorships and the presidency and all of that. And so I do have to give Bauer some credit for touching upon those things. It does seem like GT is running to address corruption in this story. And the people believe in him for wanting to address that because they noticed it too and just want someone who's willing to stand up and speak for them. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "I hold my order book tight. Then everyone here, everyone who's known him, will have seen that there are people who aren't trying to sell us down the river, aren't being dishonest behind closed doors. I don't know where you come from, mister. I don't know what kinds of people have let you down, but for me, an average American teenager, knowing there are real people in the public eye or anywhere who are trustworthy and kind makes the whole thing worth it." So a very optimistic quote from Hope, where she's talking to a journalist who's from out of town. And he's like, "Why do you care?" And she's like, "Because this guy is trying to be honest and true at a time when maybe there isn't a lot of honesty going around. He's actually trying to fight for something he believes in, which is pretty significant. Imparting that on young adult readers is very important because you want them invested in this system too. And you see a little bit of big business influence and shady tactics taking place with lying and outright like manipulating the public in a lot of ways. And even targeting people who might be voting for the other guy, which is, again, very important to talk about, highlighting how not everyone plays fair in politics. However, I again feel that the ending of the story is too neat. It seems like GT loses the election, but then weeks later it's found out that Mayor Millstone had actually cheated, and GT actually got enough votes. And so what I think the message that comes out of that is, oh, you don't have to worry. If you lose, it's because the other people cheated. Like there's certainly a message to be garnered from losing to someone who's using shady tactics and still being optimistic that you can fight for change in your small town. But here it just comes off as naive and kind of misleading for young adult readers. Again, like part of the problem is that with books like Holes and Because of Winn-Dixie and A Wish in the Dark, like those offer complex themes and messy situations that don't resolve as easily as other stories. And here's something that's just like, oh, here's a problem, here's it getting fixed. Politics is very easy, and like you shouldn't stoop to their level to fight back when you're having an election or when you're working in politics, which is an especially bad message in this day and age when you have people who are like, fascist and conservatives who are trying to take away your rights. And so, oh, you can't fight them. You have to work within the system. And sometimes the system isn't clean. So I feel like this is misleading, naive, and even kind of a harmful message to send to children. And I think Bauer should have like reworked this and possibly like considered more about politics than she is doing here. Bauer also talks about family here. Hope yearns for a close family. She wants that experience of the mother and the father. But again, her mother is kind of distant, not really willing to be a mom, and she doesn't even know who her father is. So she sees other people having that, and that's something that she wants, which is, I'm sure, something a lot of people can relate to, not having those aspects of their life and wanting the picture perfect sort of family. And so there's a feeling of being lost and the fear of missing out and just missing out in general. But things seem to get better as she becomes closer to GT, and also her aunt fills the motherly role in her life. However, again, the ending is a little bit too neat as it just has GT adopt her, which happens in real life, but also like it just solves the parental problem. And like there doesn't really seem to be a struggle there because her mom comes back into her life, and like she's there and then she leaves a chapter later, and it doesn't really seem to have that big of an influence on Hope. A lot of this is due to a problem of like characterization, but also exploring emotions in this story is not something that Bauer does particularly well. And so the ending comes off a little bit too neat. Again, where you could have complex ideas and struggle and, a character overcoming their hardships, Bauer doesn't seem to want to do that, and I feel like the story definitely suffers because of that. And there are other problems. The plot feels barely there. It's just a rush through of a political election without dwelling on anything in particular. And again, that rush story is especially a big problem because nothing feels like it's given time to breathe. And so all of these become problems, and ultimately it creates a story that's actually not very good. And so the question I then have is this, why was this nominated for a Newbery Medal? Was it because it was timely, because there was an election in the year 2000 and people were like, this feels timely, and they didn't bother to read it? Or I don't know, maybe this is like good enough for young adults, but I feel like it trivializes like elections. It simplifies it in a way that is not helpful for young adult readers. And when I compare this against a book like Holes, again, because of Winn-Dixie, which was nominated in the same year, and other books like A Wish in the Dark, it feels like those are much more complex. They have a lot more to offer young readers. And so this means that either, somebody bribed someone else to get like on the nominee list, or there weren't that many competitive books in the year 2000. Could be an indicator of a lack of quality in the year 2000. I don't want to go that far because that sounds a bit harsh, but I do have to point out that this doesn't really hold up over time. And a part of that is like Bauer can't really predict the future, but it feels kind of simplistic and overly naive for what the audience that maybe Bauer is writing for. So I kind of expect a lot more from a book that is a Newbery nominee. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Joan Bauer's Hope Was Here, and a subpar book in my opinion, not one that's worth checking out. If you think that I'm being too harsh on this book, especially because it is young adult fiction, let me know in the comments below, but I assert that even though this book is for young adults, that doesn't mean we have to trivialize various concepts or even write like books without a real plot or substance to them. Young adults deserve a lot more, I think. And I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have liked this when I was a young adult reader as well. So take that for what you will. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, or if you have something to say about my review. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author if they don't already know. Also, join the Discord if you want to have further conversations in that regard. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and election year travels. Farewell.